Well, good evening, everyone, and welcome to the Brian Crombie Radio Hour on Saga 960. Unbelievable honor of mine tonight to introduce you to Mayor Gord Krantz, who is the mayor of Milton. He is, if not the longest serving mayor, almost the longest serving mayor. I'm not sure where you stack up versus former Mayor Hazel McCallion of Mississauga, who I've had the pleasure of interviewing, but you were elected in 1980 as mayor of Milton after serving as his town councillor from 65 to 80. So you've been reelected for a total of 21 terms. It's incredible. And Milton has grown dramatically in that time. And so we're going to chat tonight with His Worship Gord Krantz about Milton, about the GTA, about the suburbs, about his visions, about his experience and his career. Mayor Gord Krantz, welcome to the show. How are you, sir?
Brian, very well. Thank you very much for having me being part of it here this evening, Mayor. Very much look forward on sharing some of my thoughts, where we've been, where we're at. And of course, I don't have a crystal ball, but we have to be prepared for the future. So where we're going is what's really important to me and all of us.
Well, let's start there. We can come back, later on in the show and ask a little bit about your background and why you got involved in politics and some of your experiences, et cetera. But what is your vision for Milton? Milton is, I think, one of the fastest growing cities in all of Canada. You have just ballooned in size in the last decade or so. What's your vision for Milton in the next 10, 20 years?
Well, of course, as you know, the province of Ontario has mandated every municipality, especially in the GTA and the Golden Horseshoe, places to grow. We at the town of Milton and region of Halton take that very serious. So growth is going to happen regardless whether you want it to or not. You either work with it or it'll work with you. So we've been very fortunate over the years. We've been pro-growth. At least I have been in the biggest majority of councils that I've headed over the past, 40 plus years as mayor. Brian, when I first got involved in this business back in 1965, Milton's population was roughly 4,000 plus. Now, keeping in mind, we went into regional government in 1973, so our population more than doubled overnight with the expansion of our geographic area. So presently, we're approximately 135,000 people.
4,000 to 135,000.
That's right. In my period of being an elected person, so that's pretty dramatic. There's no question about it. But keeping in mind that did double, or a little more than doubled in 1973 when regional government came into effect in this part of the province, in Halton, York, Peel, Durham, places like that. And we were one of them. So I was on the scene for all of that too. So that was rather interesting on changing into the regional government format from the old county system. So been there, done that. I've seen a lot of changes, not only in Milton, but in Halton.
What do you think the future population's growth going to be in Milton if you're at 135 today?
Yeah, I've always, for the most part, Brian, worked on increments of 20 years, long-term planning. So we go up to 2042 now. So I predict Milton's population in 20 years' time will be roughly 250,000 people.
So doubling.
Doubling is exactly what it will be in the next 20 years, for sure. We, in the town of Milton, there was 2 official Canadian census that we wore the crown for the country on being the fastest growing municipality in the country. That's percentage-wise. Now, I know you can do all kinds of weird and wonderful things with numbers, but we were, for 2 official Canadian census, the fastest growing municipality in the country. And I think, it goes down to that old cliche of location. It's pretty well everything, I think, where people want to live, where people want to work, where people want to play. So we're located so centrally here in the town of Milton.
You are. You've also done, I think, a really good job of keeping your old downtown, the village core. I used to go to a place called Cafe Americano quite a bit for some incredible food, and there's several other great restaurants there. What do you think was the reasons why you were able to keep that downtown when so many other villages, cities towns have lost that downtown feel.
Well, Brian, I would like to think that I was part of that, on keeping, because if you don't know where you've been, there's a good chance you won't know where you're at. You sure as heck won't know where you're heading. So history is very, very important to a community. But, I was blessed with councils of the day that made sure that that was not going to change. And it really hasn't changed. So we protect the architecture pretty close there in the heritage in the old downtown area. As an example, the town hall was an old county courthouse, an old jail courthouse. And that's where the Milton Town Hall is located now. It was quite controversial, pretty well at the same time that I was elected. We bought this building. It belonged to the province. We bought it for $1. At that time, we spent roughly $3 million fixing it up, moving into it. But part of that reason was, Brian, the seat of government here in Milton is right downtown in that old downtown area that you talk about. So
Yep.
The heart of a community is around the town hall. So we had the vision to do that, albeit you were criticized, but anything that's worthwhile is worthwhile doing and taking your chances on doing it. So we did it right.
Before COVID, you used to close off some laneways or streets for farmers markets and festivals and things like that. Obviously, with COVID, you've done less of that. Any plans to really sort of reinvigorate what's going on downtown?
Yeah, most definitely. And you're absolutely right. We closed off a good portion of the old downtown area, Main Street there. And it was quite vibrant. You would get thousands of people down. And it was a Saturday morning, usually from about 6 a.m. in the morning until about noon. And in the nice weather, it was shoulder to shoulder down there. Now, mind you, the market is still being continued, but not in the same fashion on Main Street. They've moved around a bit. They moved to the Heritage Park, the museum in Milton, here in rural Milton Heights area. And of course, at the fairgrounds. So I rather suspect the Chamber of Commerce, who heads that up, and the small businesses in town, it's my understanding that they'll want to come back to Main Street. And I think I speak for the majority council. We want to see them come back to Main Street again, because it really is not only some great fresh fruit, vegetables, meats, etc., but it's a meeting place for people where people get to meet one another, and it's more of a social event. And it's really, it's gotten to be one of the best, as I am led to believe, in the province of Ontario.
As I was going to several different establishments in downtown Milton and walking around your main drag, I was really impressed with, I think it was Milton Strong logos that I saw everywhere. And really the community came together to support each other during COVID. We're chatting tonight with Mayor Gord Krantz of Milton. He has been mayor since 1980. And prior to that, he was a city councillor from 65 to 80. He's been elected 21 terms. Unbelievable. We're going to take a break for some messages and come back with His Worship Gord Krantz in just a minute. Stay with us, everybody. Welcome back, everyone, to the Brian Crombie Radio Hour on Saga 960. So I've had the opportunity to interview on her 100th birthday former mayor of Mississauga, Hazel McCallion. I just 2 weeks ago had the honor of interviewing the former mayor of Toronto, David Crombie, who, by the way, is no relation to me. I've interviewed the mayor of Windsor on what was going on Ambassador Bridge. I've interviewed about 12 different mayors from around Ontario, including Burlington, Toronto, Ottawa, etc. So it's really a pleasure for me tonight to interview one of the longest serving, and I think maybe now you are the longest serving mayors in Canadian history, Mayor Gord Krantz of Milton. He was elected mayor in 1980. He was a city councillor from 65 to 80. Before that, he's been elected 21 terms. And I've had the pleasure, you may not remember, sir, but we've had a couple of social occasions that we've been together. And you're always filled with fantastic anecdotes and comments about what's going on. And it's really been a real pleasure getting to know you, sir. I wonder if you could let us all know how and why you got involved in politics way back in 1965.
Well, thank you very much, Brian. I'll get to that in just a moment. And again, picking up on some of your comments there, I'm led to believe now that I'm wearing that crown of being the longest serving mayor in the country. one other little antidote as well. I don't take myself too serious, but I take what I do very, very serious. And you alluded to that, of course, been referred to sometimes the life of the party. I don't think so, but anyway, I like those social gatherings that you had just referred to. Now, backing up to 1965, Brian, my wife and I were married in 1958. Okay, so I think if I get my math right, we're close to our 63rd wedding anniversary.
Congratulations.
Thank you very much. And keeping in mind from 58 to 65, that's not a long period of time. So my wife and I was in a very successful business. I was in the wholesale oil trucking business, very successful. And of course, I, like many other people, guess what I was doing? I was criticizing the people that were in government, such as our local town council. And they quite often, Brian, you accuse women, ladies, of chit chat in beauty parlors. Well, listen, some of us guys, including me, is probably just as bad, if not worse, than anybody else. I was in a barbershop, believe it or not, complaining about what the elected people were doing or not doing. So somebody had enough nerve to say, well, if you think you can do any better, why don't you run? Because I was always up for a challenge, and it never left me. Now, keeping in mind, Brian, back in the day, elections were every year. Then I think I served 2 or 3 one-year terms, and then they moved to 2 years, and then they moved to 3 years, and now, of course, they're 4 years. And of course, people are pretty good on doing their math. And of course, you had mentioned a couple of times already, this is my 21st election, and you are absolutely right. Now, people think, well, the 4-year election, that would make me about what, 480 years old, I guess, somewhere in that, if you're to start to calculate those 4-year terms. But they were 1 year, 2 years, 3 years. So that's how come the 21 terms. But the odd part of it was, and these were 1-year terms, and that little episode that I talked about was probably, I don't know, probably July or August, because keeping in mind 1-year terms, and nominations were a little different than what they are today. All you had to do is show up at a meeting that was called, and they were usually in October, as they pretty well are now. So I said to my wife, the very night of nominations, I said to my wife, I'm going to go up to the high school, is where they held these nomination meetings. And all you had to be, of course, at that time was 21 years of age, which I was. And of course, you had to have no, criminal record. You had to either own, rent, and live in the town of Milton, which I qualified for all those. So I show up. My wife said, well, how come you're going there? I said, I'm really not sure. I just want to find out what's going on. But I still had it tucked away in the back of my mind what that fella said to me, you think you can do any better? And I never approached anyone to say, would you support me? Never did. So I go to that meeting, and of course, being in business, I was part of the Milton Chamber of Commerce at that time. Of course, I walked in there. Well, everybody knew me. What are you doing here? Are you interested in running? And I honestly wasn't. I was just there interested in what was evolving. So all of a sudden, the meeting starts. And I think if I recall right, it was between 7 o'clock to 9 o'clock. So about halfway through the meeting, somebody jumps up and identifies himself and says, I nominate Gord Krantz for council. Somebody jumps up and says, I'll second that. Of course, that's all it said. All the rules were all laid out. And of course, fast forward, comes 9 o'clock. There was 11 of us, and I remember this so well. There was 11 people nominated for 6 spots on council. And of course, the clerk that was running the meeting, we knew all the rules. I said, well, I'm going to read the names from the bottom up and then from the top down. And when I read them from the top down, you either indicate you're either going to stand or decline. Why? Oh God, here I go. I never called chicken in my life and didn't intend to be then either. So, but I knew the rules. So they get to me, Gord Krantz, you stand or decline. I said, I stand. So also, Brian, the rules of the day, you had until 5 o'clock the next day. They call it sober second thoughts. You then could still withdraw. But if you didn't withdraw and make it known you were withdrawn at 5 o'clock, you were automatically on the ballot. So I go home and tell my wife what he was. She says, "You're going to run?" So what do you think? He says, you're going to do what you're going to do anyway. And she was probably absolutely right. So I never did go at 5 o'clock. So I automatically went on the ballot. So of course, election comes along and 11 people, 6 to be elected. I finished right in the middle of the pack. I finished in 3rd spot. And, the rest is history. But the odd part of it is the very next year, and I was about as mouthy and about as obnoxious as probably any elected person could be. But I thought this experience, I thought it was making, some inroads. Well, I run again. Keep in mind, just 1 year went by pretty quick. Well, I was reelected, but I was reelected to the last spot. So what the heck happened?
So you went from 3rd to 6th.
Yeah. And I knew why, because I was just too controversial. What a lesson that was. So I knew I got my act together and finished, really, really well right after that. So it was a lesson to be learned. I still use the thing, you got to know when to hold them and you got to know when to fold them. So I got to learn fairly quick to know when to fold them.
So you became a lot less controversial in that second year? That's
right, yeah. I wasn't challenging everything and anybody that went on. And that's what happened. I come very close to losing. So,
well,
things would have been different.
sometimes
So that's how I got into the business.
Some very famous politicians have lost the second time, have gone on thereafter to have been incredibly successful. Pierre Elliott Trudeau, he lost majority government and by chance ended up running again, and Charter of Rights and Freedoms, Bill of Rights, the Canadian Constitution all came because of that majority government that came after his loss. Abraham Lincoln, I think he lost 5 times.
It gives you a reality check. Is really what it did, and I recall that very well. So one of the things I adopted very quickly too. What I was attempting to do is to please everyone. Brian, in this business, if you attempt to please everyone, you're not going to please anyone. So I adopted the philosophy, I'm elected to attempt to serve the majority of the people the majority of the time, not all the people all the time, because it just does not work.
Now, what's the highest percentage that you've won in any of your times on ballot?
I'm not sure. I know last election, I think it was about 83% of the vote. I got not bad.
God, that's 17% of people. Who are they? Where are they?
Well, and it's funny you say that. In the last election, Brian, I had many, many people congratulate me on, a successful win. But one fella, and I remember it so well, and this will make you a little bit humble from time to time as well. He says, "Congratulations, you got 83% of the vote. That's pretty darn good." He said, "What did you do to that other 17 people?" I said, "Well, I'm not sure." I said, "Anybody that strives for 100% of the vote is not going to get it." I said, "I'm satisfied with 17, 17 people, not like out of 100, of course."
Yeah.
So I'm using that analogy there, but keeping in mind that they were not acclamations. There were 2 individuals that was running against me there too. So, and again, sometimes those individuals, and I'm a firm believer in democracy. I really am. And sometimes those individuals are so well-meaning, but they're referred to every once in a while as fringe candidates.
Yep.
I'm not going to suggest they were, but they weren't a name really familiar to a lot of people. And I guess that's why I probably got 83%. But I'd say, Brian, for the most part in my career, I probably finished, in the 60-70%. I think probably is an average in that ballpark, but still isn't too bad.
Well, you've had an impressive career, and you've done great things for Milton. So I congratulate you on that, sir. We were sitting in we were sitting in the lobby of the Harbor Castle Weston once, and we were arguing and discussing GO trains. And you were of the opinion that if we could do all day two-way frequent GO train service and maybe even get another station in Milton, that it would transform Milton. Tell me what's happening with GO train service to Milton these days.
Well, we're still working on that all-day two-way system, and I think it's getting closer, Brian, to be honest with you. And I think it's just the population that'll do it. As an example, with on that Toronto line, I know it takes in Etobicoke, Mississauga, and of course Milton. It ends here in Milton. And I go back to the big pipe. Milton, actually, we talked about the growth of Milton, but believe it or not, Brian, back in the late 80s, early 90s, we actually lost population in Milton, albeit, and I talked about those census, we lost a couple of times 200 or 300 people. Population declined. We were a stagnant community. And the big problem there was water and sewer. We're an inland community. And of course, I was bound and bent on bringing the big pipe up from Lake Ontario, which eventually it happened, but it was almost 20 years later. Pulling the money together to put that into place by the private sector was huge. So that opened up the so-called floodgates for the growth in Milton. Took me 20 years. The GO train thing that you and I are talking about is maybe in 10 years. So anything that's really worthwhile is worthwhile sometimes waiting for. And that's how come I got so much gray hair. I guess just waiting sometimes for those major things to happen. It will happen.
Do you think there's a chance for more than one station in Milton?
Yeah, there definitely is. The present one that's on the main street, roughly around the James Snow Parkway, that's already in place. And they got lots of room for expansion there as well. But the next one, Brian, will probably happen out around the Trafalgar Road, Derry Road, Britannia Road area in there, because the line runs out through there. In some of the long range planning, that's where some of the growth in Milton's going to happen, is out in that particular quadrant, towards the boundary of Mississauga. And densities will make it happen even quicker. And densities are definitely the way of the future. And I talk about high rise, because right now we're dealing with high rises in the neighborhood of 25 to 35 stories. And for Milton, that's a little unusual. I know there's all kinds of that in Mississauga, our next door neighbor, for sure. So yeah, it's going to happen here too as well. So that'll bring on public transit much, much quicker.
Do you think that Milton is developer friendly or anti-development?
Well, I can only speak personally. I'm, pro-development, development friendly. Everybody's not on that page, and I include some of us elected people. But if you don't deal with growth, growth will deal with you on its own terms. And I learned that a long, long time ago. So I've been one of the ones that dictate what should happen. And it has happened. And like as an example, green space in Milton, we're well above average. I'm just working with the development community. I know it's mandatory, like 5% parkland. Quite often we've been able to negotiate with the developers. If you want to make it happen, we need a little bit more green space, a little bit of park. And guess what? 9 times out of 10, it happens. So that's just an example.
A few weeks ago, Ontario Task Force on Affordable Housing released their report with 55 recommendations, a lot of them to take power away from cities and give it either to developers and or to, effectively an Ontario Land Tribunal or LPAT or OMB type structure. And it's almost as if they distrust, local government zoning regulations. I don't know if you've had a chance to review any of their recommendations, but what did you think of that idea?
I don't know them, Brian, in detail, but I got a reasonably good grasp of what's being recommended there. I'm a little concerned about what's being advocated, but the province got to do something. Affordability, housing, we're in a bit of a crisis there.
Sure are.
Getting rid of some of that red tape, I don't care whether it's at the local level, the regional level, or the provincial level, has to happen. But they're definitely, we do definitely have to listen very closely to what the municipalities are saying. And don't overrule them. As an example, and it's funny, we talk about this now, you and I were just chatting about the heritage. It would be a shame, as an example, if, say, some developer come along and said, well, I want to build 2 or 3 great big high rises right in downtown Old Milton. And there would go that very old historic area that you and I just spoke about. I do not want to see that happen. And, and I don't think, and I'd only hope that the province, the powers that be, wouldn't want to see that happen either. But as I understand what's being advocated, there's an outside chance that could happen. So, I think there'll be a fair bit of pushback when it comes to that.
Well, the right place for the density is around the GO train stations. So there's no question.
No question. And, we've been planning that for quite some time, and that's really where a lot of it's going to happen. We're in the process right now, and especially, where the GO station is here now. And they're going to happen probably within the next year, 2 or 3 big high rises in that, 25 to 30 area tower that I just mentioned, just because of the GO station. And there's been a bit of pushback on some of that with some of the, older subdivisions that's, reasonably close to it. So, but it's going to happen.
We're chatting tonight with Mayor Gord Krantz, the mayor of Milton. He's been mayor of Milton since 1980. He's been on city council since 1965 when he, by a lark, went to a meeting and nominated himself, got himself nominated and ran and got elected. We're going to take a break for some messages and come back in a minute with Mr. Krantz, his worship, Mr. Krantz, and we're going to ask him about some of the other issues that are going on around Milton from an expansion. Some of the railways are talking about big new trading yards, Highway 413, hospitals, etc. See what the mayor has to say about some of those issues. We're going to take a break. Be back in a minute. Welcome back to the Brian Crombie Radio Hour on Saga 960. It's an honor of mine tonight to be interviewing Mayor Gord Krantz, the mayor of Milton. He's been mayor since 1980. He's been elected 21 times. Mayor, were you born in Milton? Have you always lived in Milton?
No, I wasn't, Brian. A lot of people figured that I was born and raised in Milton. I was born and raised in the Milton Heights area, the former township of Squeezing, the hamlet of Milton Heights. It's right in the area of Kelso, Glen Eden, right in that area, right at the foot of the Niagara Escarpment. So, but not born in Miltonian, but as close as damn as to swearing, I guess. But Milton was always considered home for me and my family.
I tell you, I went to, I can't remember what the farm was called, but a wonderful farm that was up on the escarpment and sold incredible apples and maple syrup, and did a tour of a couple of homes on the escarpment with a view of Milton and all the way down to the CN Tower. Some gorgeous properties that you've got there on the escarpment.
Yeah, I think you're probably referring to Spring Ridge Farms. They're still there, and quite active. It's quite a tourist attraction. Have lots of good fruit and vegetables and goodies up there.
I had a great time there, and I had another wonderful evening in at a concert venue that is an apple farm, isn't it?
Chudley's, yeah.
Chudley's
Apple Farms.
And they built a concert venue at the back, and it was just spectacular.
Yeah, most definitely. And it's quite a popular spot there as well. And it's a great big apple orchard there too. But boy, especially around apple picking season, it's a traffic jam, believe it or not, getting in and out of that area. But it's a real tourist attraction. So there's lots of open space here in Milton, especially right around the escarpment. And believe it or not, Brian, probably 70 or 75% of Milton is green, with parkway belts, green belts, white belts, NEC, conservation areas. There's over 10,000 acres of conservation lands in Milton. So we've got a little bit of everything. It's a little piece of paradise. You
got some great golf courses that I've enjoyed, and I've chatted.
Definitely. Yes, all kinds in the Milton area.
And I've wandered around, I think it's called Mill Pond, right in downtown.
Sure. Right in the old historic part of old downtown. Well, a lot of people figure that was natural, but that's a man-made pond. There was a grist mill there for years and years and years there that operated under water power. So that was a man-made pond, but quite a historic place and quite a nature place. A lot of trails around there. People picnic around there, and Rotary Park is very close by. So it's a pretty popular spot.
CN was planning a huge new marshalling yard, train yard. What's your opinion of that, and what's the status of it?
Well, of course, the region of Halton has taken a lead role on opposing it, with the four area municipalities, Burlington, Oakville, Milton, and Halton Hills joining in and opposing what's happened, because it was never part of the region of Halton or Milton's long-range plan to have. And by the way, CN owns roughly, I think, 1,000 acres, 1,100 acres there too. And they're proposing about 300-400 of those acres as a marshalling yard for containers there. So, you know, and everything that went along with it. It's still, believe it or not, still in the courts. And I suspect it's probably going to be another year or two before it's all settled. We're still fighting against it. But like I say, there's a legal aspect to it and confidentiality on some of that stuff that's being handled by the region now. So it'll be very disruptive, no question about it, if that was to go ahead to the town of Milton. And it's right on the border as well of Oakville and Burlington.
Right now, I guess CN has their big marshalling yard in Concord, at the center of Toronto. And so I guess their justification is they want to have it on the edge of the city so that they can more efficiently distribute the containers going onto trucks to distribute around the city. So it's an interesting development that might take place.
That Brian has been hanging around now for, I guess, probably at least 12 or 15 years. They were very aggressive to start with, and then they backed off. It looked as if they were going to go away. But they come back, 3 or 4 years ago with a vengeance on pushing it once again. So it still hasn't been resolved, far from it.
Premier Ford recently announced that he wants to build this 413 bypass around Toronto, and it will intersect the 401 at the interchange at the Milton-Mississauga border with the 407 and 401 and this 413 all coming together. But that's got to be a disaster for Milton if you've got 4 different highways all coming into the 401 that comes through Milton. And there used to be a proposal that would take the 413 farther west and join the 401 near Guelph or Cambridge. What do you think about the 413, sir?
Well, a lot will depend where it goes, and you're absolutely right. I can only speak personally where that might intersect. If it was to go a little further west, like you say, towards the Guelph area up there, it wouldn't impact Milton near as bad. But it would impact, you know, our neighboring municipality, the town of Halton Hills, more severely than anything else. And you're absolutely right. Milton is either blessed or cursed with some of the best highway systems there is in the world, like 407, touching right on the edge of Milton. Of course, Milton's got 3 interchanges on the 401. We're not all that far away, of course, from the 403 and the Queen Elizabeth and, you know, Dundas Highway and stuff, places like that, Steeles Avenue, Britannia Road, Derry Road, some of those major regional roads as well. So, but, you know, Brian, I look at it, we know for sure that in Halton's case, our population roughly right now is 600,000 people. 20 years from now, it's going to be 1.1 million. Is the car going to disappear? I don't think so. There's probably going to be less of us driving, but just do some of the numbers. There's going to be more and more cars. And I'm just talking about Halton. What about the Greater Toronto area? We already know there's gridlock, and there'll be more gridlock. So these roads are going to be needed in the future, unless all of us or most of us gets out of our car. And I don't see that happening for the next 50 or 75 or 100 years.
So you're supportive of the 413, but just think it should connect up with the 401 farther west.
Exactly. That has been my personal position for quite some time. And I don't know, I've never had any or much conversation. I know that the region has taken a position on it, and so has, say, the town of Halton Hills. I'm not sure with Burlington Oakville, what their thoughts on it. And we at the local level here really haven't dealt with it too much, because it really hasn't touched Milton at all. But it could have a positive and or negative impact on it there too. So business and industry is important. So you're going to need transportation. So how are you going to deal with it?
I understand that there's been some issues in regards to hospitals for Milton or universities for Milton, and or if not for Milton, maybe at the northwest corner of Mississauga, so shared by Milton, Mississauga. What's the status of hospitals and universities?
Yeah, well, it's a done deal now with Laurier University, and Conestoga College is definitely coming to Milton. It was on hold for quite some time there, and believe it or not, and you heard me mention before, Brian, that sometimes it takes a long time to get these things played. And again, I've been dealing with that issue now for at least a good dozen years, at least that, maybe 12, 15 years in that neighborhood. But it is going to, there could be, hopefully, maybe even a shovel in the ground this year to start some of that out there. And it's right around, we refer to it as the Milton Education Village. And that's in the area where the velodrome is. I don't know if you're familiar with the velodrome that's in Milton here, one of the only in Canada. And of course, it was built for the Pan Am Games.
Yep.
So there's roughly 450 acres in that quadrant out there, where it'll be referred to as the Milton Education Village. There'll be a research park, there'll be the college, university, and there'll be a bit of residential stuff, and it'll be a little community unto itself, probably with 30,000 people.
I heard that that was a potential for another GO train station spot.
Yeah, I don't think that that'll happen though, but you never know. I doubt it if that'll happen in that particular, but transit is going to be important, and we're making provision for transit there to hook up, say with the GO train. The way the crow flies with it on Main Street there, it's probably a 5-minute bus ride, as an example, hooking with the GO train. So it's not a big deal.
What about hospitals?
Hospital, we were fairly fortunate. We got a very large expansion here in Milton back, I guess, maybe probably 5 or 7 years ago. But again, it took us years to get that in place. The hospital was really built for about 25 or 30,000 people. And at that point in time, we were probably 100,000 people. So it just couldn't deal with it. But, you know, and the best part of it was they have the land now for future expansion. Right now, it's my understanding that things are going reasonably well. And we're blessed with being so close to, say, Mississauga, where, you know, you have the Trillium, you know, your Credit Valleys and some of those hospitals, and of course, even some of the major hospitals in Toronto. But the one here in Milton serves not only the town of Milton, but I know there's people from Burlington, Oakville come here. And of course, the Oakville Hospital, with that major expansion, a lot of people use that as well here in Holland.
Right. You mentioned that regional government came in place and doubled the size of Milton at one point in time during your career. And that we talked about how, you know, your Milton's going to double in size from 135 to 250,000 over the course of the next little while. That you think that all of Halton is going to double in size from, I think you said 600,000 to 1.1 million.
Yeah, that's the projection. Yeah.
And, you know, some people are saying that that a population the size of Montreal, 1.5, 2 million people, are going to move to the GTA in the next 10 to 20 years. So we're going to go through a massive change in the GTA. I spoke with Hazel McCallion, former mayor of Mississauga at one point in time, and she referenced a report that Ann Golden did back in the late 1990s called the GTA Task Force that said that Peel should amalgamate, Halton should amalgamate, Durham should amalgamate, and York should amalgamate. There should be 5 mayors all sitting on a new GTA council. She said it's the right thing to do, but no one's got the political gumption, the political guts to make it happen. What do you think should happen with regional government in the GTA?
Yeah, one of the things, and again, on the philosophical side, Brian, bigger is not necessarily better. Okay, smaller sometimes is smarter. Okay, keep that in mind. Now, I was one of the people that wasn't, you know, I really wasn't too supportive of regional government in those early days. But at least in my opinion now, I think regional government here in Halton that I know so well is working quite well. So do I advocate, as an example, I just talked about Halton now, the 4 area municipalities, should they come together? I don't see any real reason for it at this point in time. But even worse, would say Halton, York, Peel, and Durham form one great big huge, you know, monstrosity of a government. you might as well just let the province of Ontario run the whole show. Would that be good? I'm not so sure. I'd be a little hesitant to even want to think about supporting that type of government because it's working, in my opinion, reasonably well now.
You think regional government works okay?
Yes, I mean, it's got its warts, there's no question about it. There's, such as planning as an example. Sometimes the region of Halton, regional government could overrule one of the local municipalities with some of their planning initiatives. And I'm a little,
Now, I understand that, and I may have this wrong, but I think you elect some town councillors that sit only on town council and other councillors that sit on both town council and regional council. Is that correct?
exactly, yeah.
Is that confusing for the electorate?
No, it seems to work reasonably well. Milton downsized its council last term, as a matter of fact. Very few municipalities did that. We went from 11 down to 9. There's 9 of us that's elected that run the town of Milton, elected people. There's the mayor's automatically on regional council, and I have 4 local councillors and I have 4 regional councillors. So there's 5 of us set at the regional level. And regional council, there's 24 people. That includes the chair of the region of Halton. That makes up the region of Halton. The only one in Halton, Brian, that is both, and I think, and I stand corrected, I think Mississauga, they're all local and they're all regional. City of Burlington are all local and all regional. Town of Oakville, Town of Milton, Town of Halton Hills have both.
We're chatting tonight with Mayor Gord Krantz. He's the mayor of Milton. He's the longest serving mayor in Canada currently. And I doubt anyone's going to surpass him. He's originally elected as mayor in 1980. He was elected to city council in 1965. He's had an incredible career. We're going to take a final break for some messages and come back with some concluding comments in just a minute. Stay with us, everybody. Welcome back to the Brian Crombie Radio Hour on Saga 960. Tonight, we're sitting down with His Worship, Mayor Gord Krantz, the mayor of Milton. He's the longest serving mayor in Canadian history. He has that title now. He was elected to city council in 1965, was elected mayor in 1980. He's been elected 21 times. Sir, are you going to run again in October?
Well, I've been asked that quite a bit, Brian, recently. I've still holding the cards pretty close to the vest at this point in time there. And I've always said in my elected career that the public will know exactly where I stand at least 4 or 5 months prior to any election.
So you're not going to announce it on the Brian Crombie Radio Hour?
I just love to, Brian, but sorry about that.
Sir, what's your biggest victory? What are you most proud of during your career?
Well, I guess as cheeky as it might sound, Brian, I think really one of the biggest things is my victories is the people of Milton having faith in me. And I think that, is one of the biggest victories that a person could really want. They're on the biggest majority of people that put their trust in me. And that's monumental as far as I'm concerned, And again, with victory becomes failure sometimes. As an example, I'm a pretty, conservative individual when it comes to spending money. We've got one of the lowest property tax rates in the Greater Toronto area here in Milton. Am I a little cheap? Yeah. Am I a little frugal? Yes. And I don't apologize for that, but I get criticized for that sometimes. And I have failed on a couple of occasions to hold the line on budgets. I've been overruled by majority council, and that's democracy. I've always supported in, at, and around rates of inflation on tax increases, very little above or very little below, and it served me well. So, as an example, I'll use the illustrative. Rate of inflation was 2%. I had no problem supporting a 2% tax increase. But if council says, well, our staff recommends 5%, majority council says, 5%, majority votes for it, and I vote against it. So that's failure on my part. I've had 2 or 3 of those.
Mayors in our system only have 1 vote. So
That's
you're not like a prime minister or a premier that get to sort of whip your caucus and appoint people to cabinet and get people to do what you want. Do you think that's a good system? Some states, some cities in the United States have what they call strong mayor systems, where the mayors have a lot more influence, a lot more power. What do you think?
Well, I like the system we got, Brian. Just think about it. If I had that power, I'm not a believer in dictatorship, and I'd even hate to think of myself as being a dictator for a moment. But that could happen very easy. Putting my personal will upon majority of people or majority elected people. I don't subscribe to that, to be honest with you.
What's been the biggest emergency? We've seen, Mayor Watson have to deal with what's going on in Ottawa, and the mayor of Windsor having to deal with the Ambassador Bridge. Hazen McCallion made her name with a train derailment and dealing with that. What's the biggest issue that you've had to deal with?
Well, we get two or three of those twisters or little hurricanes that's gone through Milton here. And of course, the big ice storm of 5 or 7 years or so ago now, that caused some real problems here in Milton because rural, and I got a granddaughter that lives in rural Milton. She was out without hydro for about 8 days. So you can imagine a couple little grandchildren that, was there. They had to move out of their house. So those were things, and she was just one of many. So those are things that you had to deal with, those types of, call them disasters, are really inconvenience on accommodating people, putting them up in hotels and stuff like that. So, but I'm fortunate, we've got two major railways that run through this community. Pearson International Airport is the way the crow flies, 20 minutes from us. We're in the flight path. So, there's been none of those major incidents.
And you got a big prison.
Yeah, in Maplehurst, yeah. And, sometimes, that's an asset to the community. They have some real good jobs there, and there's been very few problems, if any, with Maplehurst. They're a good community organization here in Milton.
Is there one big thing you still want to do?
Leave a legacy on working for the people.
If, as your last comment, if you were speaking to some young person that was thinking about going down to the local high school and getting nominated to be a counselor when they were in their 20s and being involved in local politics, what would you say to that young person tonight, sir?
Go for it. I'd say go for it, but be prepared to be criticized and don't take it personally. That just is democracy. That's how it works.
Mayor Gord Krantz, the mayor of Milton, longest serving mayor in Canadian history. Thank you so much for joining us tonight. Really appreciate it. And I hope you're on the ballot in October, sir, and run for the 22nd time. I've had the pleasure of spending a fair amount of time in Milton the last couple of years. And I got to tell you that your people love you. They think you're just fantastic, and they think you're doing a great job. And I think they want you to run again. Anyway, thank you so much.
Yeah, I think you're probably right. And again, you heard me say to start with, I don't take myself too serious, but I take what I do very serious. Brian, thanks to you and all of your listeners. Good night.
Thank you. Well, that's the show for tonight, everybody. Thanks for joining us. I'm on every Monday through Friday at 6 o'clock on 960 AM. You can stream me online, even in Milton, at www.saga960am.ca. Thanks for joining us. Thank you to His Worship, Mayor Gord Krantz. Good night, everybody.